Hi, my name is Ainhoa. I'm a journalist from Spain, and the question is for all of the speakers. You have mentioned a lot of studies that have been published. I would like to know how many of those studies have been supported, financed by the alcohol industry, and if you think that can be a bias of the the people who pay for those studies.
Would you like to mention? Would you like to have an opinion of all three, or maybe only?
Whoever wants to answer, yeah.
Let's see who would like to respond on this. It's a very clear question. The bias when the industry is paying, yes or no?
Is it on? Okay. So I'll take a stab at it. So number one, there's a fallacy that if a study is funded by industry, the finding may not be valid. Let me tell you, as a researcher, a scientist, it takes years to develop your career. And I don't know any scientist who would take penny to jeopardize their career by fudging the data. Because believe me, if you don't report what's valid, somebody, someday, would publish that, and it will ruin your career. So to me, and to my other colleague, it's non-issue, because whether I get funding from the NIH, NIAAA, industry, whether spirit, beer, whatever, I report assess. If the only condition is that the sponsor has nothing to do with data analysis, data collection. We have control of everything because we want integrity. When we publish, when we sign up with our name, it means that we can guarantee the validity of what we're reporting, irrespective of what the support was funded from.
Yes, so this is, I think, a very good argument to also for the researchers to keep that in mind. But maybe, why is everybody...
Could I just say
okay.
that I don't think any of the big studies cited have had any industry funding. I think that should be made very, very clear.
Yeah. Okay, but maybe, just say, Luc, why is this argument coming up every time again? And why is it so difficult to tackle this one in the way you did so nicely? Why are people not believing us?
Well, the other thing is, when we publish in a top-tier journal, the editor, they have the right to request the data and give the data to their own in-house statistician to reanalyze if they have a doubt to any validity. So that's something the public should also know, that you know, most scientists, they don't close the door, cook the data till they find something that will satisfy, you know, this side or that side, and they say, oh yeah, we're going to publish this, because it goes through rigorous review. We all review papers, requests every day, hundreds of solicitations to review. So if the paper is not the conclusions are not supported by the data, we're not going to write a good review to suggest that the paper be published. Okay. So that's another layer of catching, you know, the validity, so that you have limited bias and the sponsor doesn't have anything to do with it. But that being said, I don't know the data, but anything is possible. It's possible that somebody somewhere may be doing things that are not correct. But most prestigious institutions, you can be assured that what's published in the literature, funded by industry or not, is the science, is the truth. The science evolved over time. So what we knew yesterday is probably less than what we know today. So, and tomorrow probably we'll know better. And that's help also explain some of the inconsistency in the literature. It seems inconsistent, perhaps because back then, 30 years ago, the methodology, Mendelian randomization didn't exist. We have to rely on certain tools. Today, we have the app to collect data that can take a picture and minimize some of the misclassification bias. So we're going to continue to have better quality data over time also.
Mr. Innes, would you like to respond on the question as well?
Yes, if I may add and answer more specifically to your question. I have not read all studies, all papers regarding beer and human health, but I have read the meta-analysis presented and more other meta-analysis. And what I have to say is that in the majority of these meta-analysis, there was a clear mention that there was no conflict of interest in the majority of the authors published their papers and used in meta-analysis. Moreover, it is not often from the alcohol industry to fund studies and randomized trials as it is in pharmaceutical industry, for example.
Okay. I have seen many responses now. So one here, one in the back. Would you like to continue on this topic or take something else? Yes, you would like to take something else. Okay, sorry. Maybe the question in the back. Raise your hand, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Tim Webb, European Beer Consumer Union, and in my spare time, a consultant psychiatrist. Interesting combination. It's a very specific question, mainly for Helena Konibier, about the validity of the science behind the numbers in the recommended alcohol units. My understanding is that if you tot up the amount of alcohol that is drunk by people by self-report, it's roughly half of the amount of alcohol that's sold in the community, suggesting that people underreport more or less by a factor of 2. I think it's 1.9 to 1. How does that translate into the numbers of recommended units? Is that taken into account, or are they based on self-report units?
Certainly, there are papers written on the issues around underreporting, and it is believed in terms of medical studies to have an effect in some cases. In terms of responsible or low-risk guidelines, I don't think that has played a part. I presume you're talking about the UK in particular.
The UK is where I'm most familiar, the 1.9 to 1 I think comes from the UK.
So the UK new guidelines are based on both short and long-term alcohol attributable risks over a whole lifetime. So the desire to change from the relative risk from a non-drinker to that lifetime attributable risk is that the cardiovascular protection only applies to older populations. That was part of their rationale.
Okay, in the front, please.
Yep.
It works.
Yeah, thank you. It works. Thank you very much. My name is Kees van Adem. I'm from the Dutch Brewers. And I have also a question for Ms. Konibier. I think the conclusion of Professor Kok after your speech was that the focus has changed and not really the evidence has changed. And I think also in the other contributions we saw that the evidence is still very clear. Is that only, when you look at guidelines internationally, only for alcohol, or do you also see that the focus is changing for other foodstuff in guidelines? So that's one question. Second question, it's striking to see that based on the same evidence, different countries come up with different guidelines. Is there a golden standard guideline? If you would look at it very clinical from the science perspective, what would be the golden standard of guidelines, if at all possible?
Okay.
Goodness, right. Well, guidelines are emerging, of course, for fats and sugars and salts, but I'm not an expert in those areas, so couldn't comment. Certainly, we have quite a hard line on obesity in the UK, for example, which is highlighting other dietary elements that are deemed to be of equal importance. In terms of a golden guideline, if we look at the medical evidence, I think there is quite a clear definition of what moderation is, and it's sort of up to 20 grams a day for women, for healthy adult women, and up to 30 grams a day for healthy adult men.
Okay. In the back, this person, and then you here in the front. First, you, sir.
Yeah, David Long from the UK. Again, I'm afraid for Helena to respond on guidelines.
You're popular.
It's just an observation that you may wish to respond to. But when we look at solid food and advice to consumers about maintaining weight or losing weight, it strikes me it's very simple. We're told how much a healthy adult may eat in terms of kilocalories. We're told how many kilocalories are in the foodstuffs they're eating, and we rely on them to do the simple mathematics. When it comes to alcohol, it seems to me that there's a conundrum. There's a temptation to invent a unit which is supposed to help the consumer. There's an arbitrary unit of alcohol, or there's a standard drink. Why do we need this? We've got SI units. We rely on kilocalories. Why can't we rely on milliliters? As you've shown, the interpretation of how many milliliters or milligrams of alcohol make up a unit vary across the world, and indeed vastly across Europe. How is this supposed to help the consumer? Are we overthinking it? I mean, don't we want very simple guidelines in order to make inroads in giving people guidance on sensible drinking?
Well, certainly there's quite a lot of evidence that consumers are confused by what is defined as a drink. They're quite aware of, certainly in the UK, looking at the old guidelines, awareness of the daily guidelines of 2 to 3 units for women and 3 to 4 units for men was quite widely understood, but there was a lot of confusion as to what a drink was. And I must admit, we do a lot of face-to-face education with parents in particular, as well as professionals such as teachers, and there is a lot of confusion as to what a drink is. It's quite interesting looking at the RARA have put a huge amount of time into assessing a will across Europe to adopt any idea of a standard drink, and it clearly isn't there. So I don't know quite what to say, really. I think, say in the UK, we've had 8 grams for such a long time now. To move away from it could be very confusing, even though 8 grams doesn't represent a drink in any way. It's, you know, half a glass of wine, or perhaps it's half a glass of weaker beer, and it's one shot, and it does represent 10 mils of alcohol. But I think perhaps you've got a clearer idea of what you think the way should be forward than me.
Okay, it's I think it's an important question, but it's, I mean, I could ask you what is the ideal world, but then you probably would say that we get a standard in the EU or worldwide, but that's not easy to achieve, I can imagine. The question here to you, yes, for you?
Yes, Patricia Ostrowski from Mexico, and I have 2 questions. One for Professor Demosthenes, which you raised a very interesting fact at the end of your presentation. It was a very shocking thing, and in a way, you just leave it there in the
air.
In there, yeah, right. And it's that people that drink beer doesn't eat very healthy food.
Yeah.
But they still have a lot of protection.
Yeah.
The G shape, while
Exactly.
people that drink wine, we all know the Mediterranean diet. So that's one comment. Would you like to comment on that? And the other is, probably we talk a lot of alcohol, but there are specific substances in beer and in wine which are different. And I do think that beer has very interesting substances that could protect people, if not in high quantities. And that's for all of you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Please.
Yes, thank you for your comment. I don't have many things to add. You said exactly what I intended to underline, giving this. So the feeling is that from the available evidence we have till now, from observational studies, this protective effect of moderate beer consumption seems to be underestimated if we take into account the other dietary patterns that people follow, people who drink beer follow.
Okay, we have time for a final two final questions, one here and this one there. Maybe one on the Mendelian randomization or so. I like that so much. I'm not influencing you.
I'm Franz Martin from Spain. My question is from Professor Luke. It's a very nice presentation. After your presentation, I realized that it's very difficult to reach to a clear conclusion from the observational studies, because there are many different aspects we don't really know, especially from the genetic point of view, like plenty of polymorphisms we don't know, and even we are not considering all epigenetic factors. So how can we reach to a clear conclusion? Because you are speaking about classical genetics, but what about epigenetics?
So that's an interesting question. So what my talk was focusing on is that if you conduct an observational study, you don't use the gold standard, you find something, it doesn't take away the fact that you didn't use a randomized trial, you have residual confounding or unmeasured confounding, doesn't mean that your study is invalid. It's the other way around. If you conduct your study, you don't find anything, do not celebrate, say that's the end of the story. Because I didn't find anything, there's nothing there. I'm just pointing out that, hey, gotta think about what's called humility in research. Say, wait a minute, maybe I didn't get it right. Maybe I'm missing something that the other guy, whether it's population admixture, you do study in Italy, Spain, or Mexico, or Canada, you find this. And somebody tried to replicate in India, they don't. Perhaps it's the co-segregation of specific gene, specific disease frequency, and dietary pattern that came up. Some people, they eat the French fries or sausages with beer versus wine drinker with fancy meal, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not, unfortunately, it's not one size fits all. It's just cautioning that a lack of an association, a lack of corroboration of your data to what has been published doesn't mean that you're wrong or the other one are wrong and you're right. It's just saying perhaps there's something that you didn't capture in your study. And then with the omic era, we should be thinking of constructing something similar like genetic risk score, where you have 200 loci that affect lipids. We know they all affect CHD. You don't take one locus and relate to CHD, but you analyze all of them together and construct one vector that is relating to your outcome. Perhaps in the future, that's what we're going to be looking at.
But maybe, in a short comment, please, your conclusion on the J shape was firm.
Absolutely.
Tell us why.
Absolutely, because from the biology, I mean, as a scientist, you start a good study question, start with the biology. What do we know about biology? What does alcohol do to HDL, to platelet aggregation, to fibrinogen, to PI1? So is there a biology pathway to explain that this relation is causal? We have that. And study after study, well conducted, and different type of observational bias, we fix it. So I can maybe address one of the questions for the front here, where the dietary pattern is an issue, that people that drink certain type of beverage, they're doing poor, their diet is not so good, or they're poorly educated, income is less, they cannot afford. Guess what? In Boston, we have health professional follow-up study, we have the nurses, we have the physician health study. Nearly 30,000 US male physicians. These are the top guys. They're self-prescribing the latest technology. Their diet is fantastic. We still see the same thing. So we can, without a randomized trial, we can find a way to address bias, because it's not good enough to say, oh, there's bias. In science, you got to quantify which way is it biasing your results, if any. Sometimes you have a negative bias, meaning it's underestimating your effects, so that when you adjust, the effects is going to be larger. And that's what we've been trying to do.
Okay. I like that. Sorry. Oh, last question in the back, and excuse me that I run out of time, but I think it's too important to stick to only a few questions. Please.
Good morning. Kevin Sinnott from the Brewers Association of Australia and, more importantly, New Zealand. Thank you for everyone that's helped me be here today and inviting us to come all this way. I have a question for Dr. Luke regarding genetics. And it's a little bit of a personal question in that my father-in-law has muscular dystrophy. And it's a gene that's within our family. I'm interested, when you talked about genetics, has there been any studies on diseases like muscular dystrophy around when you're already born with the genetic condition, whether a moderate level of consumption as an adult can slow the progress or the digression of the disease? And certainly my father-in-law is a very big believer in moderate consumption, 1 or 2 glasses of red wine or beer a night. And in the 10 years I've known him, he's had very little digression from his 50s into his 60s. And has there been any studies globally that you know of around this?
Unfortunately, to my knowledge, no. I don't know any study of alcoholic beverage recruiting people with muscular dystrophy. So unfortunately, I don't have the answer for that. But again, the genetic aspect of alcohol, I know currently we focus on the enzyme metabolizing alcohol. We haven't done a GWAS of the phenotype alcohol drinking. So what are the genes that determine if somebody's going to drink 1 unit, 2 unit, or 20, 30 grams per day or per week, or binge drinking? So only one we're going to learn more about what are the genetic determinant of who's going to go on to drink moderately, who's go on to drink only weekends in binging, and then we can use that information to elucidate the alcohol disease relation. But for now, I'm afraid we're still at the beginning of the journey, even though it seems so many years after you talk when you mentioned the history.
Okay, so thank you very much. I would like to have an applause for the discussions and for you.